So again, high res, just hire me please. I came up with this exact idea in a video like maybe 2 weeks ago. Obviously, I'm not trying to claim that I came up with this idea. They probably had this idea before I did, given that my production process for a video is like maximum 2 weeks to a month, whereas they've probably been thinking about these changes for many months. But yeah, it's just pretty cool that like we kind of had the same idea at the same time.
Today, we become legends.
So the mid-season update notes just dropped and there's been a ton of mostly core gameplay changes, but also new items, god changes, non-conquest balance, like a new system for that, which is going to be really interesting to see how that pans out. And I thought I'd give you guys an update since this is a pretty major patch. I usually don't cover like all the patches that get released in this game because there's a lot of them and often they're fairly small patches. But I do like to cover mid-season, big updates, new seasons of course, that kind of stuff. So we're going to be going over these notes in a fairly brief form. Not going too in-depth on things because a lot of these changes I really can't go in depth on necessarily because they're really sort of systemic changes to the game that will require some time to play out and a lot of playtesting and things like that to fully figure out how they're going to work out. But yeah, without further ado, let's just jump right in. So Nickelodeon x Smite, obviously I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about this, it's been pretty huge on Twitter and things like that. Here are the new skins, full update notes will be linked down below if you want to check out the voice packs for the skins, the full card art, all that kind of stuff. The free gods are actually changing, so Thor, Ra, Guan Yu, Artemis, Ares have been some of the free gods for the longest time. Honestly, I think basically the whole game's existence, I think maybe a few of them have changed. But new free gods are going to be Bacchus, Izanami, Poseidon, Thanatos. So in terms of these are great picks to be completely honest. I completely agree with all of these. They're all fairly simple gods to play that will be great in the hands of new players. You know, anyone can hit a Poseidon Kraken and do really well. Anyone can clear lane very easily with Izanami, get pressure and win. Anyone can snowball with Thanatos and win. You know, Chak, fairly easy abilities to land. Bacchus, just a really good solid support with plenty of everything you need. Granted, a lot of these gods were fine as well, you know, Thor, Ra, fine, Guan Yu, fine. Artemis, to be honest, I wouldn't recommend as a new player hunter simply because of the lack of mobility and the fact that she's so late game and you're going to get stomped in lane by people playing stuff like Izanami. So, in general, I like these changes. I think these new gods will be much better for new players. And here we have the full new player lineup. I mean, Yamoja, what's Yamoja doing here? To be honest, Yamoja should not be a free character for people, absolutely not. I know they want to include like some characters that have a little bit more depth, but Yamoja's not the one to go with. Go with something a little more simple. We have new favor prices for tier 2 skins, which is really nice. Instead of having to always pay 250 gems for the tier 2 skins, you can now get a nicer skin that's not quite a recolor, but is a bit nicer for a slightly more expensive favor cost. This also gives me something to spend my 450,000 favor on, you know, if I don't have a lot of these tier 2 skins. I have a fair few of them, but some I don't have that I actually like, I can pick up on some gods. And I don't have to pay any gems for it, which is really nice. So some general balance changes here. The brawling out of combat has been increased from 3 seconds to 5 seconds, and we'll see a bit later down that also the anti-heal has been adjusted to be 5 seconds as well, down from 6, I think. And as they say here, this is just generally to sort of like even out the timings on things, so it's not like you're out of combat and getting that healing reduction and also still having Divine Ruin or Brawlers applied to you at the same time and you're getting like a lot of healing reduction. Now, when you come out of combat, Brawlers/Divine will expire on you or will have already expired, so like you should be fine on that end. Increased support bonus, so I released a video today actually covering Smite mechanics, and then they changed a bunch of Smite mechanics in the new patch notes right after I put out the video. This always seems to happen with me, but yeah, instead of 35% increased shared XP bonus for supports, it's now going to be 40% increased. And also they slightly adjusted the mid-happy XP values as well. But now we're getting into the pretty juicy stuff of this patch note. So we've got a bunch of new glyph items. Obviously, this is something I've been asking for a long time in the game. I think it was very silly to only release 5 glyph items, but I suppose their thought process was like they were trying to try these things out and see if people liked them, and now they figured out that they're quite a good way of doing things. They're adding more tier 4 items. So first up we have Jotun's Wrath. So Jotun's Vigor, this is not actually the right icon, I believe. I'm pretty sure they're keeping the one that heals you and not keeping this one, so just a note there. But they're going to be actually removing this one, the icon for this one, and replacing it with Jotun's Cunning, which every time you damage an enemy god with an ability, you gain a stack. At 2 stacks, your next non-ultimate ability that damages an enemy god gets 25% of its cooldown instantly refunded, and obviously this can bypass the cooldown reduction cap, so if you're going to be at 40% cooldown, which you have a Jotun's in your build, you're already at 20%, you're probably an ability-based assassin or warrior, you're going to have 40% cooldown reduction, so essentially your next ability only has 35% of its base cooldown, which is very powerful. This is replacing, as I said, this one, not got the healing one. I'm pretty sure this is a mistake in the patch notes, and that is a lot more powerful. That is significantly more powerful, because not only is it giving you a very powerful effect, but it's a very powerful effect that kind of stacks on top of why you're already building Jotuns, whereas this other one was kind of like a unique effect that wasn't really related to the fact that Jotuns gets cooldown reduction, whereas this is just going to stack more cooldown reduction on top of your already 40% most likely. And so that's going to result in some pretty crazy scenarios, I think, where someone dumps an ability on you and then 3-4 seconds later they dump another one on you. Should be pretty interesting, a bit like Staff of Murden, I guess, but it's now for physicals, and we'll see later down that Staff of Murden has also been reworked. So moving on to Rod of Tahuti, this is now accurate. I'm not sure what they were doing with this one, but this is fine. This is the current Rod of Tahuti that's staying, the one that calls down the meteor. And the Nimble Rod of Tahuti, the one that gives you attack speed, is going to be moved to a different item, and it's being replaced with Perfected Rod of Tahuti. With a passive that successfully damaging an enemy god with an ability applies a mark for 3 seconds, damaging them a second time with another ability consumes the mark and provides you 10% movement speed for 2 seconds and reduces your non-ultimate abilities by 1.5 seconds. Only one mark can be active at a time and cannot be applied for 10 seconds after consuming the mark. So presumably if you hit multiple enemies with this, it's not going to mark them all, and then you can consume the marks on them all and get tons of movement speed and refresh all your cooldowns. It's not going to be that crazy. It can only be applied once. But even so, this is a bit like the new Jotun's Glyph as well, and like old Staff of Murden that again has been reworked, where it's kind of reducing all of your non-ultimate ability cooldowns by a flat amount. This could be very powerful. Granted, it's competing with Calamitous Rod of Tahuti, which is also pretty good, but it does depend on the god. I think on gods where it's harder to secure the meteor damage, so like gods that don't necessarily have a CC that can guarantee confirm that, you might go Perfected Rod of Tahuti instead. Also, naturally, gods that are already building cooldown reduction / gods with lower cooldowns, this is flat cooldown reduction, not percent, so it's actually going to be better on gods that have lower base cooldowns. You know, if your cooldown is only 6 seconds, this is going to be, what, 25% of that cooldown? But if your cooldown's 15 seconds, it's only 10% of that cooldown. So, generally, you're going to want this on low cooldown gods. You know, think about this on Hebo. You one someone, you 3 them, your one's off cooldown, basically, because it's, I think, 1.6 seconds with max cooldown, so you just 1-3-1 as Hebo, and you're not even rooted by your 3 anymore. Like, this is going to be nuts on Hebo. Even though the other one was already quite good on him, like, this is just going to be crazy. Prepare to see a lot of Hebo with this item. But moving on, we have the first new item that's getting 2 new glyphs. There's a few in here that have been getting this treatment. The first one being Bancroft's Talent, of course. This one is inheriting the passive from Nimble Rod of Tahuti. So as I said before, they're going to be shifting some passives around from certain items. They're not necessarily deleting them all, but they're moving them around. And this one goes on Bancroft's Talent instead. And for every 40 magical power you have, you get 2% attack speed. You know, everyone knows this. It's been a game for a while on Rod of Tahuti. I do think this works a lot better on Bancroft's Talent though, because now on like ADC mages where you're wanting lifesteal anyway, you can build Bancroft's Talent and still get a ton of attack speed from that. You know, even if you're only at 400 magical power, which is a fairly conservative estimate for a late game magical ADC build, you're probably going to have more than that. You're going to be getting 20% attack speed from this item, on top of the 100 to 200 power that Bancroft gives you and a ton of lifesteal. I think Bancroft is going to be really strong on magical ADCs now, you know, going like Ring of Hecate into Bancroft's and then maybe even getting the Glyph fairly early to get that attack speed. I think that's going to be super powerful. You know, Bancroft's Typhon's Hecate, that's going to be like a really core set of items now, I think, for magical ADCs. And to be honest, their builds are kind of set in stone now. You just build Hecate, Bancroft's, Typhon's, Hasten Ring, Telkine's Ring, Demonic Grip. You know, you're kind of just done there. I mean, you have your starter items, so I guess you have to remove one of those, but yeah, magical ADC builds looking really strong right now. They've had kind of weak itemization for a little while, but this is going to be huge for them, I think. It's much better for this passive to be on Bancroft's Talent than it is for Rod of Tahuti, I think. And the other Bancroft's item is Bancroft's Claw. Every 15 seconds, you get a stack of Hunger, max of 3 stacks. Abilities cast within 30 units of enemy gods consume one of those stacks, dealing bonus damage equal to 0.5% of your max HP for every 75 magical power you have. So assuming you got 750 power, I think that's completely reasonable in like a burst mage build. You're going to be looking at about 5% max HP damage. And actually, I don't think I was clear on that. It's of their max HP, not of your max HP. So you won't be building this on tanks necessarily. But 5% max HP damage, assuming you have 750 magical power, that's pretty huge, you know, as a way to kind of shred tanks. And then each god damaged by the Hunger provides you with a shield of 1% max HP for every 75 power you have. So again, you're probably looking at around a 10% max HP shield by late game, something like that. Maybe slightly more, slightly less. And this can't exceed 35% of your max HP. It's never going to, realistically. How much power would you have for that to be possible? So this one is kind of hard to evaluate. There's a lot of moving parts here in terms of it really depends on how much magical power you have. It's probably something we need to see in game before I can really judge the power level on it. It's not as simple as like this change up here. Also, the way it's worded, I'm not sure if it can proc on multiple enemies at once. It seems like it can. There's no like clause that says it can only apply to one target, so If you're hitting like 3 enemies with this, you're going to be dealing 5% of their max HP each. And maybe that's why the shield cannot exceed 35% of your max HP, actually. You know, probably if you're hitting multiple people with this, you'll gain effectively 3% of your max HP in shields for every 75 power. And then with a 750 magical power build, you're looking at 30% of your max HP. It also doesn't seem to decay off of you at any point, this shield. It seems like it's just going to be permanent based on the item description. So, actually, I changed my mind. This item's pretty strong. Being able to just apply like a 30% shield, granted, that's assuming you hit 3 enemy gods with this, which you're not necessarily going to hit, but that's still pretty crazy. A large amount of shields there. This is going to be very good on gods like Shang Kui and stuff like that. But moving on, we have Executioner tier 4s. Very interesting. I think this is a prime item for them to add tier 4s to. I'm pretty glad they're doing this. So this first one, the Ferocious Executioner, this is inheriting Jotun's ferocity. So as I said before, I think they used the wrong icon for the Jotuns that they were actually keeping. The Jotuns with lifesteal, the ability lifesteal one, is being kept. The Jotuns with the 2% damage for each basic attack you do is being moved to the Executioner. So your next basic attack, max enemy god. If you hit the max enemy with a basic attack, you gain 1 stack. Each stack provides 2% increased damage, blah, blah, blah. Again, you know this one, it's just been moved. But the other glyph here is the Heavy Executioner. Passive basic attacks against an enemy reduce your target's physical protection by 17.5% for 3 seconds with a max of 2 stacks. So again, 35% pen. And attack speed is capped at 1.75. So this is interesting. You know, this is an item that's somewhat similar to one that I showcased in one of my videos recently, where it's kind of lowering your attack speed in return for a very powerful benefit, making each auto attack count for more, but you throw out less auto attacks in general. And they say here that Silver Branch won't start applying at 1.75 attack speed, it'll still have to go to 2.5, otherwise Silver Branch will be insane in these kind of builds. And finally here we have 2 brand new glyphs, so these aren't being moved from anything, these are 2 brand new glyphs on Magi's Cloak. First up we have Magi's Shelter. Whenever your passive is consumed, so that is on the Magi's Cloak, not your actual like god's passive, the nearest allied god within 25 units gains protection from a single hard CC for 5 seconds. If this passive is consumed before the time runs out, they gain 1 second of crowd control immunity. So yeah, essentially this is just going to provide Magi's passive to one of your allies that's nearby when you get hit, so to be honest, this doesn't seem amazing, mainly because it's kind of counterintuitive. You want to build this on a support to give your allies like the Magi's Blessing effect, but you don't want Magi's Blessing on supports generally because you're not too worried about getting CC'd once and dying. I mean, you kind of are in this meta a little bit, but like not enough to where you would want to buy Magi's, I don't think. But it is still very powerful to be able to give your teammates Magi's without them building it, because if you're building Magi's on a damage dealer, you're sacrificing a lot of damage to do that, and if your support can just kind of stick really close to you and give you that effect, it could be very powerful. 25 units is a very small range though. Ranged basic attacks 55 units, melee basic attacks 12/18 if they're extended. So it's not a super far range to be honest, but in general I don't think this item's going to be super strong. However, Magi's Revenge looks really good, so the first enemy god you hit with a hard crowd control while you are protected becomes marked for revenge for 5 seconds. Gods marked for revenge cause enemy gods within 40 units to move 20% faster towards them and take 10% increased damage. So essentially, whoever procs your Magi's Blessing, you get revenge on them, you move faster towards them, and they take more damage. And the reason I think this one is stronger is because it's actually like synergistic with the item and doesn't work counter to it, because if you're building Magi's on a damage dealer, you're going to want to be kind of like destroying that god that's diving you. Or like if they're even running away, like you got that increased movement speed towards them, like it's just gonna be better. Like if a Thor ults you and procs your Magi's Blessing, you can just destroy him. Whereas like with this one, I don't know, they'd have to be like ulting your support and you're standing near the support and then you get the immunity as well. Again, I don't want to call this item trash necessarily, because it could be one where like it really needs to be used in game to prove how powerful it is, but I think this one's better personally. So the masks are being reworked to essentially provide scaling decrease in damage / increase in damage, instead of like when you buy the item you just get a like really big change to your playstyle in terms of you'll be really more tanky or really less tanky and dealing more damage. So this scales from 6% plus 0.25% per your god's level, so that's going to be 11% at max rank, 20 times 2.5, yeah. So you're going to be decreasing damage dealt by 11% and decreasing damage taken by 11% at max rank with this thing, or at max level. And masks are also being reworked into starter items, so getting the assist for an enemy minion or a jungle monster will provide 8 bonus gold and restore 15 health and 15 mana, so this is just a support passive, enabling mage, assassin and hunter supports to be able to buy this item early and still sustain up without having to buy a regular starter item on top of the mask. And then obviously it upgrades into Lono's mask, and the passive on this one, you gain 5 stacks of cowardice, and each stack reduces your damage dealt and healing output by 10%. For each 60 protections from items, you remove one of those stacks. When you remove one of those stacks, you gain a stack of Bravery, which increases your damage mitigation and provides protections to allied gods within 55 units. So this to me just seems insane. Like, the fact that you can remove the entire downside of this item, I feel like this is really pushing Mage, Assassin, and Hunter supports like a lot. It's 60 protections from items, and this will count for both, I assume, since all the items that are worded like this, like Pridwin, will count for both. So 60 from each. That's 300 protections you need total, 150 of each. That's completely reasonable to get on a support, like absolutely reasonable. You could get that in 3 to 4 items, I want to say. And the fact that you can remove all those like negative effects from you and you just have an item that's really good and provides 15% damage mitigation and 35 of each protections to allied gods within 55 units. You know, you stack that with Thebes, that's 45. Granted, you can't stack it with Sentinels because that would be insane, but obviously you can't because this is a starter item, but still, this seems really crazy. I think Loneliness is going to be insane now, even though it was already very good on like certain gods that are viable in support. I think this is actually going to push Mage, Assassin, and Hunter support so much that like we'll see new gods being viable from those classes in support, not just like the E-sets, the Noxes, the Fenrirs, the Nejars of the world, the Serkets of the world, all those kind of ones. I think we're going to see more flex from these classes in support because this item just seems broken to me. But moving on to Fighter's Mask and Ranger's Mask, obviously the reverse equivalent of Lono's Mask. So again, on the starter item, it's the same kind of numbers. You got 6%, which scales up to 11% based on your god's level of increased damage dealt and increased damage taken. And this one provides 2 MP5 per 10% of your missing mana, and your abilities deal bonus true damage to minions. And then upgrading into Ranger's Mask, this one provides 5 stacks of weakness, so this works in basically the same way as Lono's Mask. Each stack increases your damage taken by 10%, so you're going to be looking at 50% increased damage taken when you initially buy this. However, it's not that, basically. For each 65 physical power or 90 magical power from items, you remove one of those stacks, and when you remove them, you gain a stack of strength, which provides 3% increased damage dealt and 2% movement speed. So sadly, again, I think Ranger's has got on the shaft. Lono's Mask seems a lot stronger than Ranger's, as it always has been. Granted, 15% increased damage dealt and 10% movement speed is very good, but the requirement to actually remove those stacks is quite a bit higher than Lono's, I think. This is going to be slightly better on magicals just based on the mental mass here, because 90 magical power is a lot easier to get than 65 physical power. You know, plenty of magical items have 90 or more magical power, whereas not many physical items in the game have 65 or more. And again, it's hard to say an item that gives you 15% increased damage dealt is going to be bad, but Ranger's in general was a similar kind of thing. But it's just that you can remove these debuffs. It seems really strong. You know, if you just buy this item when you already have a ton of power and you don't even get any of the negative effects, really, you know, you just leave this as a starter item and you kind of like get shafted a little bit in the early game by taking more damage, which has always been how Ranger's works. But then once you get this upgraded, it's got to be pretty insane. The thing is, you'd need, what, 325 physical power or 450 magical power? 450 magical power is absolutely no problem. Any mage can easily get that much, but the physical power is quite a stretch. You can obviously do the physical power. In most builds, you'll get that much, but you're going to have to wait till very late game to be able to do that. You know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that both these masks are insane. I think Lono's is a lot better, but Ranger's will still see play, I think. And for the first time since we got all those new Arthurian items with Pridwin and Arendite and not Silverbranch, what's it called? The bow. Fail not, that's the one. Since the first time we got all those new Arthurian items, we're having an entirely new item tree in the game. It's going to be the Earrings tree. So the tier 1 is just 15 MP5, but 400 gold. This is interesting. You know, we've not had a tier 1 item be this cheap, I don't think ever. At least in a long time, but I don't think ever. So depending on the cost of your starter item, you know, maybe supports could buy like this, and maybe another item. I'm not sure how the gold will work out there, but yeah, basically this is very cheap, very easy to pick up at basically any point in the game. It's going to branch into 3 different tier 2s that branch into 4 different tier 3s. So this first one provides attack speed, power, and MP5. Second one provides power, cooldown reduction, and MP5. And the third one provides health, MP5, and HP5. So the first tier 3 item here, we've got the Griffin Wing Earrings. These provide 25% attack speed, 40/60 power, 15 MP5, and a passive that basic attack projectile speeds are increased by 40% and basic attack damage is reduced by 15%. So again, high res, just hire me please. I came up with this exact idea in a video like maybe 2 weeks ago. Obviously, I'm not trying to claim that I came up with this idea. They probably had this idea before I did, given that my production process for a video is like maximum 2 weeks to a month, whereas they've probably been thinking about these changes for many months. But yeah, just pretty cool that like we kind of had the same idea at the same time. This is essentially trying to turn your basic attacks into more like hit scan basic attacks, which the item that I provided in my video just straight up turned them hit scan and hit all enemies. They want to go with obviously a more conservative approach. I was just throwing out ideas in the video. They're actually trying to balance a game and not piss off a bunch of people. So it's understandable why they've gone with a less crazy implementation of the same idea here, but this should be really cool. This is class locked to hunters and mages only. Makes complete sense. You don't have any use for this on melee gods. Travel speed, they don't have a travel speed. Next up, we have Sphinx's Baubles. So 2,700 gold for this one, quite expensive, whereas this one was 2,200. Very cheap to get online. 2,200 is one of the cheaper items in the game, but Sphinx's Baubles provides power, cooldown reduction, MP5, and the cooldown reduction cap has been increased from 40% to 60% while you hold this item. Ability damage dealt is decreased by 20%, and ability healing decreased by 20%, again, like Lono's Mask. So already I'm thinking about crazy cooldown scenarios, like with Rod of Tahuti, Glyph, and this. So you're up to like 60%. 60% cooldown reduction off of 3 seconds on Hebo 1 is like 1.2 seconds, I think, if my mental math is right. So Hebo 1 would have a 1.2 second cooldown with this item, and then the 1.5 seconds off of it just immediately refreshes the cooldown with the Rod Tahuti Glyph. That might honestly be overkill, because the Raw Glyph already provides your one with basically no cooldown on Hebo, but yeah, we'll have to see, because this does decrease your damage by 20% and healing by 20% as well, so it does come with quite a substantial drawback for this very powerful effect. Yeah, as they mentioned here, like they're mentioning Guardians here, I do think this will be more viable on gods that aren't necessarily trying to deal loads of damage, and are just trying to throw out like CC and utility. That 20% cooldown, like the decreased damage dealt isn't going to be as relevant to gods like Guardians that are just trying to throw out CC, and the cooldown reduction is going to be huge. You know, Geb Shield is like a rough example that I'm thinking of, because Geb Shield doesn't heal, so it's not going to be affected by this. It doesning deal damage, so it's not going to be affected by this. And it's going to have like a ridiculously low cooldown with that, 60%. Again, it'd take a lot more analysis and playtesting to figure out who this item's going to be broken on, but I guarantee it will be broken on someone. Geb is my first instinct, because his ult does like % HP damage anyway. It'll probably still be affected by this, but like, in general, Guardians aren't trying to deal loads of damage, and just having more Geb shields up and more like knockups, more stuns is just going to be really useful. The third tier 3 from the Earrings tree is the Manticore Spikes. These provide health, regeneration, and CCR, and a passive of when you hit an enemy god with a hard crowd control, they drop a spike on the ground. When you or an ally pick up that spike, they gain a buff that causes their next ability to deal bonus damage equal to 3% of their max HP. This effect is doubled if you're the one who picks up the spike, so in general you want to be picking up these spikes yourself, but teammates can also grab them if you can't. Spikes last 7 seconds on the ground and they don't stack. Picking up another spike just refreshes the buff duration. So yeah, this one and the next item are essentially introducing a new gameplay loop that kind of comes within the item, and I really like this a lot. I've been calling for these kind of items in the game for a long time, where they provide something more interesting than just a pile of stats, and I do like this effect a lot. I think it's pretty cool. Obviously, tank stats on the item, max HP damage on the effect. You're looking to build this on tanks generally. This is the tank version of the earrings. Based on the wording of the item, I assume you can drop multiple spikes by hitting multiple enemies, but picking multiple up won't really do anything. So like if you're going to blink Geb up the backline on 4 people, you just pick up one spike yourself and then try and either hit more gods with more abilities to get more buffs and keep picking them up, or let your teammates pick them up. The fact that the effect is doubled if you're the one that picks up the spikes, 6% max HP is like a lot. You know, if you're a tank who's got like over 3,000 HP, that's going to be 180, a little bit over in terms of extra damage there. And if you're already building Glad Shield to increase your damage on abilities, you're stacking it with this. This could be really powerful. And finally, we have the Fey Blessed Hoops, 2,200 gold, 300 health, some regen. Each time an allied god within 70 units of you dies, or you heal an allied god with an ability, a flower drops from your ally that can be picked up by you or an allied god. Picking up the flower gives that god a shield equal to 7.5% of their max HP for 8 seconds, does not stack, new shields refresh the duration, and flowers last 7 seconds, just like the spikes do on the previous one. So this is mainly going to be used on healers, of course. Like each time an allied god dies within 70 units of you, that's not going to happen all that much. You're really looking at the healing an allied god with an ability here to like absolutely farm these flowers. To me, this item just looks absolutely nuts. I mean, 7.5% of max HP for 8 seconds on a shield, like 8 seconds is long enough to where you can force the shield to get value generally. And 7.5% max health just for healing someone. This is going to make healers a lot stronger, I feel. I mean, the base stats on the item are absolute hot garbage, don't get me wrong. Like 300 health and that's basically it, aside from some regen. For 2,200 gold is not very good. I mean, the MP5 will be useful on healers for sure, but just the passive is insane on this one. Like, a lot of the passives are insane on these items in general, and the base stats aren't amazing, but this one in particular, the passive looks really strong on this. Because again, this doesn't seem to have any kind of clause that it only triggers once per ability, so like, if you're Sylvanas 2ing your whole backline and healing 3 people plus yourself and dropping 4 flowers, that's just ridiculous, I feel like. You're just gonna pick up a flower and then lose the shield and then pick up another flower. Like, even if you're just boxing in solo, that's gonna be really strong. But moving on to another one of my crazy predictions on why Hyro should hire me as a game designer, we have the changes to diminishing returns. So obviously today I released a video about Smite mechanics, the Smite mechanics iceberg, and mentioned a lot about diminishing returns and how it works. I've now had to completely correct that in a pinned comment on the video because Hyro's changed the entire way the system works, literally minutes after I post the video, because of course, it's me. DR stacks are now a visible icon on the buff bar. This is something that should really have just been the case the whole time, so you can really see how many DR stacks you have and how it's affecting your game, because this whole system affected people's games massively, like hugely. It was 80%, I mean it still is, but it was 80% CC reduction. That's huge, and people should really be able to see when that is being applied to them and when it's doing the work for them rather than just being a system in the background, so I really like this a lot. The max stack count was increased from 2 to 4, but the CCR per stack was decreased from 40% to 20%, so this still is applying 80% CC reduction at max stacks, but it's going to take longer to get there in theory now. You don't just get hit by 2 hard CCs and you're already there. You have to get hit by 4 hard CCs for this to actually become fully effective now. Stacks last for 15 seconds, the duration refreshes on each new application. There's no change here, this has always been how it's worked, but they're just kind of clarifying this now because it's going to be a more visible mechanic to players. DR can no longer be applied to yourself or allies. I don't really know what this means. I assume this is some kind of specific interaction where you could somehow apply DR stacks to yourself or to your own allies, and that's no longer going to be the case. And fixed many code-driven displacement abilities that previously did not apply DR, so presumably every kind of hard CC in the game now is going to apply DR regardless. So hard CC is now defined as any crowd control that makes it impossible to do at least one of the following actions: basic attacks, non-movement abilities, or movement inputs. Hard CCs apply 1 stack of DR. This has always been the case, but again, these hard CC DR stacks are now half as effective because you now need 4 stacks to reach the maximum instead of 2. And roots are now considered a hard CC. Again, in my video, I'm like, oh, roots, they're basically treated as hard CC by the game, but they're really soft CC, and then 2 seconds later, they release patch notes saying they are actually hard CC. I hate this game. There's also a new classification for certain CCs called True Hard CC, and this is a subclassification of hard CCs which are defined as hard CCs that are not affected by DR and apply 2 stacks of it. So this is all those typical displacement CCs that I mentioned in my video: banishes, grabs, knockbacks, knockups, polymorphs, and pulls. So all these abilities still no longer affected by the DR system, so they won't be at 20% duration when you're at 4 stacks, they're still full duration, but they will apply 2 stacks. So effectively, these CCs work the same as they always have. They will still apply the same amount of DR technically because it's 2 stacks of 20% instead of 1 stack of 40%. It's really the normal hard CCs that have been nerfed in terms of like the amount of DR they apply to you. And soft CCs are now defined as any crowd control that makes it more difficult to do any specific action, including basic attacks, non-movement abilities, or movement inputs. So just these make it more difficult to do so, not completely disable you from doing so. Soft CCs neither apply nor are affected by stacks of DR. This has always been how it worked, no change here. Intoxicates and Trembles are now considered soft CCs. And individual abilities can apply more than 2 stacks of DR if the ability includes multiple types of CCs. So if you're looking at things like maybe Anher's Impale or something like that, where it knocks back and then stuns, that's going to apply 3 stacks of DR total now, because you get 2 from the knockback and then 1 from the stun. And finally, the whole new Non-Conquest Balance system. So gods will now have percentage-based buffs or debuffs to all modes except Conquest. Non-Conquest Balance effects will apply equally in all modes, so Arena, Assault, Joust, Slash, all those game modes. If the god you're playing has any changes applied to them through Non-Conquest Balance, there will be an icon on your buff bar and a system message at the beginning of the match telling you what changes you have, so this is just to convey the changes to players more effectively. The buffs or debuffs effects available will be damage to minions, damage to gods, damage received, healing given, non-ultimate ability cooldowns, and ultimate ability cooldown. So these changes initially are probably going to be fairly tame and only to the really top performing non-conquest gods, and I imagine they'll expand this system if it goes well into the future. So Apwash, obviously the king of destroying people in non-conquest and getting destroyed in conquest, is getting a lot of major changes. Minus 5% damage to gods, plus 10% damage to minions, plus 5% to non-ultimate cooldowns, and plus 10% to his ultimate cooldown. Artemis, interestingly, I wouldn't have guessed her to be a top performing non-conquest god, but it makes sense, you know, low mobility gods generally perform better because mobility is less relevant on smaller maps than it is on Conquest. Artemis is getting minus 5% damage to gods and plus 10% ultimate cooldown. Ares just getting plus 15% ultimate cooldown, you know, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Ares does really destroy people in non-conquest game modes where you can just constantly be like 5-man ulting people and burning beads and stuff like that. Khepri, plus 5% damage taken, plus 5% non-ultimate cooldowns and plus 5% ultimate cooldown. Zeus, minus 10% damage to gods. That's pretty huge. Zeus is obviously very oppressive in non-conquest game mode, so it makes sense. But yeah, 10% damage reduction is a lot. And plus 5% to his non-ultimate ability cooldowns. So those were all nerfs to the gods in non-conquest, but they're actually going to be doing buffs as well to make gods that do perform well in conquest but don't perform well in non-conquest game modes. So a lot of these will be assassins generally, because you have a similar thing where like mobility is less prioritized and ganks are less prioritized in these game modes than they are in conquest, and it's much harder to kind of get behind people. You know, if you think about Joust, like it's so much harder to get behind someone and catch them off guard and like getting close on Joust when they're constantly throwing poke at you than it is on conquest when you can come slinking out of the jungle and things like that. So first up we have Ao Kuang, minus 5% damage taken, minus 10% to non-ultimate cooldowns and minus 10% to his ultimate cooldown. Arachne is getting minus 10% damage taken and minus 10% to her ultimate cooldown. Baka is getting minus 10% damage taken and minus 10% to the ultimate cooldown as well. This one is interesting because Baka is one that performs extremely widely across game modes. Baka's strong in Conquest, strong in Duel, but they're not good in anything else really. So these changes are going to impact Duel and probably make Bakasura even more oppressive in that game mode. So I'm not sure if they're going to eventually switch it to like Conquest balance, Duel balance, and then other game mode balance, because there are certain situations like Bakasura where buffing Bakasura in Duel is not a good idea at all, but buffing Bakasura in like Joust and Slash is a good idea. And in general, this whole system I think is going to be very hard to make work. I'll be surprised if this goes through flawlessly. I think there's going to be a lot of problems, not necessarily because it's unworkable, but because it's going to be very hard and it's a new system that they're introducing here. Camazotz, minus 10% to all cooldowns. Janus, plus 10% damage to gods, pretty big buff there. Set, plus 5% damage to minions, minus 5% damage taken, and minus 5% to non-ultimate ability cooldowns. And finally, Circuit, minus 10% damage taken and plus 5% damage to gods. But yeah, that's the whole mid-season patch notes. Pretty crazy patch, a lot of new things coming, like obviously the non-conquest balance, the whole DRCC changes, a load of like god and item balance in general, new items, new tier 4 items. Pretty crazy patch overall. We'll definitely have to see how all this plays out. I might even hop on a bit of PTS for this patch since so many things are changing, you know, along with the 9.5 changes that they recently made to the game. Like, really, if you played the game a few patches ago and you'll play the game on this patch, it's going to be a completely different experience, I feel like, which is very nice for the freshness of the game. I'm always down for change, just to make the game feel more fresh in general. And of course, new items, new tier 4s, all that kind of stuff, going to be very exciting. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of these patch notes down below. Got any spicy opinions, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.